Stand Up.
Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Stand Up. My guest today is so special and so great. Her name is Monica Beletsky. You might not have heard of her, but you probably have heard of the show that she created and executive produced and is the showrunner for. It's called Manhunt, and it is on Apple TV Plus, and it's an adaptation of the best-selling book Manhunt, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer. Part historical fiction, part conspiracy thriller. So good. Follows the search for John Wilkes Booth in the aftermath of President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, and I loved it. I watched all 7 episodes of it, which are available now. I know several of you have as well, and my conversation with Monica about the show and her life and career, real good. It begins at 28 minutes into today's show, after my award-winning news recap. If you want to skip this very special message I'm about to share, as well as the news segment that I do every day, you can, to get to my conversation with Monica. But I do just want to say something real quick, if you don't mind. You don't mind, do you? A personal message of gratitude from me to you. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for being alive, for being in my world, for supporting and listening to the show as long as you have, even if it hasn't been that long. Some of you have been with me for over 10 years, and I always just like to take a moment every once in a while on this daily podcast and just tell you how much I appreciate you. It's so impossible for me to correspond and talk with everybody the way I want to. Which is why Pod Jam, the gathering that we had back in March, was so wonderful. Thank you again, Cassie, and everybody that's there. I'm still living with the energy and the positivity and the friendships that I created there, and knowing in my heart that you are connected to each other is really the best thing about all of this, is creating this community and connecting you with each other. I hope to see you at tonight's hangout. It's Thursday, and we've been doing these hangouts since the pandemic, really, and they are always so great and fill my cup with joy and happiness. And honestly, I think the best word to describe the feeling I get at the hangouts is I feel replenished, because we all know how important community is, even when it is virtual the way it is, and just the way that those conversations go and the people that come and the energy and the personality. It's almost always really special, and it reminds us of how important community is, especially for those of us, who don't have a lot of people locally or in our lives, period. A lot of lonely folks, but not at those hangouts. And we are here for each other. So join us. I'll have some personal news, some things to share, really good stuff happening, and I want to talk with you about it. And as always, there's plenty of news to talk about. I hope we'll spend the whole time making fun of Kristi Noem and her puppy killing ways, which is just insanity. And of course, we'll get into the campus protest, your thoughts on that, and everything else at the hangout. So join us tonight, 8 p.m. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing out on those hangouts and the community. So sign up now, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I will tell you this, best time to become a supporter of the show. Best time, because shit's about to take off here at Stand Up headquarters, and I will tell you more about it, but lots of really exciting things happening. So hope to see you tonight, and hope to convince you to stick around here in the Stand Up community, because we can do so much for each other in this crazy, crazy world that we are living in, that I call Earth One. And at the very least, what we can do with each other is remind each other that, yeah, I still live on the planet and in the country that you live in, right? Where this is actually happening, my reality. It's similar to yours to some extent, right? Isn't it? Okay. Well, let's get to reality. The news from Earth One right now, day 1198 of the Biden presidency. There are 186 days until Tuesday, November 5th, the 2024 presidential election, when hopefully we will all be celebrating that the witch is dead, because that will be it for Donald Trump's hopes to regain power, and hopefully he will be regaining a jail cell. How about that for a possible scenario? It's possible. You got to give it, even if you're the most pessimistic or most realistic person. I'm somewhere in some weird land of optimism most of the time. It is a possibility, that very good one, that Biden will get reelected and that Donald Trump will go to prison. Maybe that part is not as realistic, but maybe, hey, a boy can dream. So let's see. What do we have for you? In WTF happened today in one sentence, it's this. President Biden announced he will cancel $6 billion in student loans for people who attended the Art Institutes, a shuttered group of private for-profit colleges accused of fraud. The Federal Reserve, that's a pretty big deal, by the way. It's a pretty big deal. BFD. The Federal Reserve held interest rates unchanged at their highest level in 2 decades. I'll be talking with Barry Ritholtz on tomorrow's show. We're scheduled to, about that and so much more. If you got any questions, send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com for Ritholtz. Hopefully not about watches or electric Porsches. A federal court blocked Louisiana from using a new congressional map for this year's elections, which created a second majority black district. Democrats won a special election House seat in New York, in case you missed it, further shrinking the Republicans' majority in the House. Crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene is planning to force a vote on ousting House Speaker Mike Johnson next week. And the Arizona State Senate voted to repeal its Civil War-era ban on nearly all abortions. However, Florida's ban on abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy just went into effect. That is also a major, major deal and creates a lot less opportunity for women in the Southeast overnight to have access to reproductive rights and abortion care. And 49% of Americans want politicians to pass laws ensuring national abortion access, by the way, in one poll. Let's go a little deeper. Fed Chair Jerome Powell delivered yesterday newly discouraging news. The Federal Reserve left its key interest rate unchanged between 5.25 and 5.5%, the highest level in more than a decade, as annual inflation rates continued to stall. In its statement announcing the hold, the central bank said that in recent months there had been a, quote, lack of further progress toward a 2% per inflation goal. So not great, still better than it was. And the job market seems to be on fire. Maybe not if you're struggling to find a job. I always want to be considerate of those of you who are. And if you are, let me know. Maybe I know somebody. And here's some nightmare fuel. Sorry, I got to give it to you. But this from an interview between NBC News' Lester Holt and FBI Director Christopher Wray. And I'll give you some of that audio. But he said, as I look back over my career in law enforcement, I'm hard-pressed to come up with a time when I've seen so many different threats, all elevated, all at the same time. I'll bring you some of that interview in a moment. The vote from the General Conference delegates at the United Methodist Delegates Organization was 692 to 51, repealing their church's long-standing ban on LGBT clergy with no debate, removing a rule forbidding self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being ordained or appointed as ministers. Congratulations to the United Methodist Church. That is what we call progress. It's not all nightmare fuel here in the headline segment of the news. And this is not a great one. Bird flu has been found in dairy cows, highlighting the risk of raw milk. If there wasn't already enough risk to raw milk, don't drink raw milk, everybody. I don't know if anybody here drinks raw milk, but if you do, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if you can get bird flu. I don't know if that has a high enough viral load in raw milk. I've read a little bit about it, but yeah, just don't. All right. Well, hopefully the bird flu that jumped to mammals won't jump to humans, but it's possible, and we should be thinking about it just a little tiny bit. All right. Enough with the headlines. Let's get to the sound that I've gathered for you before we get to my amazing conversation with Monica Beletsky. Let's start with NBC News interview with the FBI Director Christopher Wray, appointed, of course, by Trump after James Comey was so unceremoniously fired and disrespected. And you can dislike James Comey all you want because you don't like, FBI in general, or you don't like James Comey because of what he did to Hillary Clinton with his press release shortly before the election. But he was definitely, in my opinion, a whole lot better than someone from the Federalist Society, Christopher Wray. And yet Christopher Wray still seems or sounds somewhat reasonable. I don't trust the guy, but he doesn't sound too MAGA in this interview. Here it is, about 2 minutes of it.
Have you ever seen a threat environment quite like the one we're experiencing?
As I look back over my career in law enforcement, I'm hard-pressed to come up with a time where I've seen so many different threats all elevated all at the same time, whether it's the threats from China, Russia, Iran, the terrorism threats, both foreign terrorist threats and domestic terrorist threats.
Among his pressing worries, says the FBI director, is the spillover from the Israel-Hamas conflict.
So we thought that even before October 7th, if you and I were having this conversation then, we would have said that the terrorism threat was already elevated. But post-October 7th, it's gone to a whole nother level.
There's an environment right now we're seeing play out on some college campuses, the protests over what's happening in Gaza. Are you watching that warily?
Well, of course, demonstrations themselves are not something that we, the FBI, get involved in. But But when violence ensues, that's when we get concerned, when you have threats of violence. And so we have seen, even before October 7th, we saw a significant increase, especially in anti-Semitic threats and anti-Semitic violence.
Are you actively monitoring these protests?
We don't monitor protests.
I mean, that's the second time he said that. Good on Lester Holt for asking. Of course, the FBI is monitoring protests and activists, especially those who are anti-racist throughout history, especially the left, especially the civil rights movement. My brother was involved in all kinds of left-wing protests for years. And of course, the FBI was, anyway, don't let them fool you.
But we do share intelligence about specific threats of violence.
Congress is on the verge of passing legislation that would essentially ban TikTok if it's not sold. You've talked about this. Many in the government have talked about the threat of TikTok. Can you be specific about what your fear is?
TikTok, for us, represents a national security concern. And the reason I say that is that TikTok's parent company is beholden to the Chinese government. So that, for us, manifests itself in three specific ways. It has to do with the data. It has to do with the recommendation algorithm. It has to deal with the software. The data, we're talking about the ability to control or collect data on millions and millions of users and to use it for all sorts of influence operations like driving their AI efforts, which are not remotely constrained by the rule of law.
Are they doing that now, or that's simply they have the capability to do that?
What I would say to you is that they are currently attempting to steal our AI and hack American technology every day.
All right. Well, there's more of that if you want it at NBC News. Christopher Wray, one-on-one. And now let's head over to some great reporting from CNN's Manu Raju. He spent much of yesterday speaking with lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where the House is going to now vote next week on whether to remove Speaker Mike Johnson from his position. The vote, of course, being forced by crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is upset and incensed by Mike Johnson for ushering through short-term spending bills to fund the government, as well as several foreign aid packages. And of course, she doesn't have the votes that she needs to remove Johnson, but she remained defiant yesterday. And here he is, Manu Raju, talking to several lawmakers, mostly Republicans. You'll hear a couple Democrats in here. I can't identify every one of them, but there's so many people that he talked to, I wanted to share the whole almost 3 minutes with you.
I really don't give a rat's ass what anybody up here says about what I'm doing.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is finally ready to make good on her threat to force a vote ousting Speaker Mike Johnson.
I voted for Mike Johnson because his voting record before he became Speaker was conservative. But once he became Speaker, he has become a man that none of us recognize.
But there's a problem. She doesn't have the votes.
Bless her heart. I think this is all about wanting more attention and not producing actual results.
98% of us find it disgusting. We're tired of the chaos. We're tired of the anarchy.
It's the wrong move at the wrong time by the wrong people. This is a distraction, and I think it's a mistake.
With a one-vote margin, Johnson lacks the votes to stay in power with GOP support alone. But Democrats plan to save him in next week's vote.
This is unprecedented that somebody's foe in leadership, the leadership of the Democrat Party, would offer to save the leader of the Republican Party.
Top Democrats praised Johnson for cutting a series of bipartisan deals, including advancing $61 billion in aid to Ukraine, even though it enraged the right wing.
It's time to end this chapter of pro-Putin obstruction.
It's a shift from almost 7 months ago, when Democrats voted with 8 Republicans to make Kevin McCarthy the first ever speaker ousted on the floor.
Kevin McCarthy, you guys voted him out. Why not? What's different now?
You know, I think what we saw with former Speaker McCarthy was he wanted to blame Democrats the entire time. I disagree with Speaker Johnson in a number of ways, but he lived up to his commitments to put this bill on the floor.
But liberal Democrats are objecting.
I certainly will not be voting to support Mike Johnson.
We can't continue to do this every time they want to do that, vacate the speaker.
Yet Johnson has the support of GOP Congressman Matt Gaetz, who led the charge to oust McCarthy.
I think in an election year right now, it probably doesn't portend it too well.
GOP critics agree.
Are you going to support that?
I'm very troubled by the leadership we've seen, where we haven't had conservative leadership. I don't think the timing's right for that.
But Republicans worry Green's effort will hurt their chances in November.
We have to understand this is not a junior high school reality television show.
Everything that we do in the House of Representatives should be in the best interest of getting Donald Trump reelected. This guy right here.
All right, there you go. That's CNN's Manu Raju with a whole bunch of different Republicans, a couple Democrats. But Troy Nell's there saying, this guy right here, that's Congressman Troy Nell's. And he was pointing to his tie, which had a picture of Donald Trump on it. So he's a real MAGA warrior. He is a Republican from Texas. All right, let's stay on Earth 2. The disgraced former president had the day off from his criminal trial in Manhattan, so he went out on the campaign trail to the swing state of Wisconsin and said, as always, all kinds of horrific things. But I just wanted to share one and trigger alert. Here comes the voice of the disgraced former president for 48 seconds of just making fun of Chris Christie for being overweight.
Remember Chris Christie? He really liked me quite a bit, right? That's only because I was wise to him. And somebody screamed out, "He's a fat pig." And I said, "Sir," and you know you're not allowed to use the fat word. If you use the fat word, you're essentially out of politics, right? There are certain words you can't. You can say obese, but you can't say fat. I think obese is probably worse. But you can't use the fat. But a person shouted out, "He's a fat pig, sir." And I said, "Sir, never, ever call Chris Christie a fat pig, ever. He is not a fat pig. Please, I'll have to ask you to leave the room." So anyway, it's called having a little fun on the campaign trail in Wisconsin, right?
Oh, man, that bombed. He created that bit. I don't think anybody yelled fat pig. I think he does this all the time. He says that people said things so that he can say them. He said, "Oh, no, sir. No, you didn't call Chris a fat pig." No, of course, nobody did. He just made it up. It's really cheap and hacky. And if a comedian did it, and they sometimes do, they would not be very well respected. But obviously, that's Trump. Here is also on Earth 3. This is yesterday at a hearing in the Senate. This idiot with the fake accent, John Kennedy, grilled a climate expert named Dr. Jeffrey Supran, claiming that he had retweeted climate activists for criticizing senators. Of course, you might remember when these climate activists attacked Senator Joe Manchin and others and really cursed him out and called him disgusting and a sick fuck. That's what the activists called Joe Manchin. Apparently, this climate professor tweeted the video of those protesters, and, well, Senator John Kennedy, that's really what he wanted to focus on, this fool.
May I please see the documents?
Yes, sir, and the witnesses' documents there.
May I please point out that this form of...
The senator's time has expired, and there are other senators waiting.
I've got a bunch more tweets. Thank you for your objective advice,
I'm sure you
Doc.
do. You can put them into a question for the record, and
yes, I'd like to submit all of the good doctors' objective tweets and scientific analysis for the record.
That will be done without objection. Senator Merkley.
May I clarify one final point?
Proceed.
These are not my tweets. These are retweets. It's an important contradiction.
You often retweet stuff you don't support? Is that what you're telling me, Doc?
I did not say that I don't support this. I simply did not tweet it, which, as you were alleging.
But you retweeted them,
I'd like to make very clear that this form of character assassination is characteristic of the propaganda techniques of fossil fuel.
You retweeted
Senator Merkley.
Didn't you?
Thank you.
Are you going to call me a sick fuck?
It's Senator Merkley's time.
Senator John Kennedy is such a jerk. That's what he does every time. He just refers to the witnesses' tweets or retweets. That's his whole hacky game. All right. Well, what else do I have for you here in the sound clip section of today's show? Let's head over to Earth 1, where the Vice President, Kamala Harris, slammed Florida's 6-week abortion ban during remarks in Jacksonville yesterday.
Now, present day, because of Donald Trump, more than 20 states have abortion bans. More than 20 Trump abortion bans. And today, this very day, at the stroke of midnight, another Trump abortion ban went into effect here in Florida. As of this morning, 4 million women in this state woke up with fewer reproductive freedoms than they had last night. This is the new reality under a Trump abortion ban. Starting this morning, medical professionals like Dr. Tien could be sent to prison for up to 5 years for providing reproductive care even earlier in pregnancy. Reality under a Trump abortion ban. Starting this morning, women in Florida became subject to an abortion ban so extreme it applies before many women even know they are pregnant.
All right, that is the vice president, of course, yesterday in Florida in Jacksonville, and her opening act was the mayor of Jacksonville, Florida, a breast cancer survivor. She slammed the state's 6-week abortion ban.
Jacksonville, we have a shared history, you and I. You've seen me lose my hair to chemo. You watched me on the air when I frankly had to vomit between segments. There was a time when I doubted I could make it. Now imagine, if you will, imagine if the government took away the freedom to determine my own treatment. Think of it. Politicians prescribing what medicine, for how long, and at what physical and mental cost. Think of how much closer we are to that today than we were yesterday. Because if the government can reach its way into the OB office or a fertility clinic, where, I ask you, will it stop? I'll go back. This issue is frankly not about politics. It is about personal freedom and slapping away the hand of politicians reaching into places where they do not belong, wagging their finger at us and telling us that they know best. We as women should have the right to make private medical decisions with our families, our doctors, and with freedom from government intrusion.
All right. That is Florida Mayor Donna Deegan taking no shit. Really impressive comments there from her. And now to a story that might be going a little undercover. I talked with Emily Atkin at Heated.World about this, but 2 U.S. congressional committees Tuesday released a report that provided a rare glimpse into the extensive efforts undertaken by fossil fuel companies to deceive the public and investors about their knowledge of the effects of their products on climate change and undermine the efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions. The report, titled Denial, Disinformation, and Doublespeak, Big Oil's Evolving Efforts to Avoid Accountability for Climate Change, was released after nearly 3 years of investigation by the Democratic staffs of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability and the Senate Budget Committee. Here is Congressman Jamie Raskin and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, 2 champions for the climate and environment, talking a little bit about what this report revealed. About 1:30 from these 2 guys. In this clip, they are blowing the whistle on the natural gas industry.
The main component of natural gas is methane, a greenhouse gas more potent and climate destructive than CO2 due to methane leaks. Some scientists believe natural gas is as harmful to the climate as coal, and big oil knows it. In one 2019 email exchange uncovered in our investigation, a BP lobbyist forwarded colleagues an MIT study showing that methane emissions from natural gas offset any climate benefits, adding, quote, "This is an issue that will not go away."
Fossil fuel companies want to disguise natural gas as renewable to lock their fossil fuels into our energy future. But don't take it from us. Take it from them. Internal BP documents show that ensuring a future for natural gas was their goal. They wanted to, quote, advance and protect the role of gas and BP in the future of the energy conversation by continuing to contrast gas as a low-carbon alternative to coal, harnessing the excitement around renewables by positioning gas as the perfect partner, and highlighting the role of gas as a friend to renewables.
Another internal document advises natural gas should be, quote, a bridge fuel in a low-carbon transition and a destination fuel for the long term. That's right, an endless bridge to the land of the carbon kings, where America stays dependent on their polluting products for eternity or until the final climate disaster.
Oh, wow. Well, that's pretty depressing, but a really important investigation. And I'll try to get one of those guys on to talk about it. It is definitely going undercover. I bet you they're looking for attention, and that desperately deserves attention, these two congressional committees in their investigation with the report that they just released, if not getting to more journalists like Emily Atkin about what is in that report. But now, because of all that, I've got to give you, well, one more clip. This is just Bishop Karen Olivento. She is a Methodist bishop in Colorado, and I mentioned that really important news about United Methodist Church. Here she is reacting to the repeal of the ban on gay apparently, clergy members. Here she is, Bishop Karen Olivento.
One of the things this vote says is to young people who have questioned whether or not there's not just a place in the church, but place in the world for them because they understand themselves to be queer. They need to know now. There's a group of United Methodists who will welcome them, love them into the person that God created them to be.
That was beautiful and wonderful. And now it's time to get to some comedy because we deserve it. Here is Jimmy Kimmel and his monologue on Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC last night.
Here's some good news, I think. According to a new report from the Washington Post, Americans are sleeping more than we ever have, or at least since scientists started sneaking into our rooms and measuring how much we're sleeping. But we're sleeping more than we have in the last 20 years. As I look around, I see some of you are sleeping right now, right before my eyes. I do think about that. So, people watching at home falling asleep all, we work on the jokes and then people, not just a few people, probably hundreds of thousands of people. Like, imagine the Rose Bowl and Dodger Stadium and the Cotton Bowl filled to capacity with sleeping people. That's who I'm talking to right now. And it's rude. It really. Hey, speaking of sleepy, Donald Trump, I guess Teddy Roosevelt is tired from winning because he nodded off in court again today. CNN reported Trump is slumped back in his chair with his eyes closed, which is what some call sleeping. Why is this not on TV, by the way? I want to see the drool. The good news for Trump is that one of his family members finally showed up at court today. The bad news is it was Eric. Eric Trump attended his dad's porn star hush money trial today, which in the Trump family it's as close as you get to playing catch in the yard.
All right, there you go, Jimmy Kimmel, with some laughs for you. And now it's time to get to my guest. Wow, almost 27 minutes of news. Oh, you know what? I had that personal message up front. Usually I try to get to the guest around 20 minutes or so, but I am very happy to have Monica Beletsky joining me for the first time because I'm a monster fan of the show that she wrote and created and produced. It's called Manhunt, and it's based, of course, on this best-selling book about the search for John Wilkes Booth, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer is the subtitle of the book. All 8 episodes of Manhunt are now available on Apple Plus. I had to wait till every Friday for them to come out, and I couldn't wait because I really, like I said, love this show. And after watching it, or at some point during watching it, I looked up and did all the research of who is behind it, and that's when I discovered Monica and her work and how interesting she was and her background is, and thought, wow, she would be a great person to interview to talk about history and this really important show that documents it, as well as a little bit about her life and her career. I certainly wanted to do this because my daughter is on track to be like her, hopefully someday, and she's in school now, by the way, transferring. I'll go ahead and say it publicly. Ava is transferring from Ithaca College, in upstate New York, private school in upstate New York, a great school, because she wants to be in New York City. So she's transferring to a public school, which is FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in Manhattan, and she wants to live there and pursue her dreams as a director, writer, actress, and that's exactly what Monica has done to great success at this point in her career. I love this show. I love talking with her about it. She's a real cool woman, very smart, very thought-provoking, and really generous. So here it is, my conversation with Monica Beletsky about Manhunt, which I learned so much from. Don't forget to follow her on both Instagram and Twitter. The links are in the show notes, as they are every day. All right, let's do it. Oh my gosh, I am so excited. So excited. This is my new favorite show. I immediately reached out to the showrunner, creator, executive producer to tell her how much I liked it. And now I landed an interview with her. Monica, welcome to Stand Up. I'm so excited to have you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Pete. I'm excited to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about you before we get to the show and your career and your life, as it, I think, leads into and intersects to some extent with the subject matter here, because you grew up biracial in Philadelphia. Tell me a little bit more about your childhood.
Sure. So I've lived in LA for over 15 years, but I grew up in Philadelphia and I didn't dream of creating TV or anything when I was a kid. There isn't like a direct link from that to Manhunt, but I grew up in a neighborhood that basically at a time before I was born, the properties were hard to get mortgages for Black people and Jewish people. And there was twins who were realtors who decided to figure out a way to work the system so that they could sell homes to Black families and Jewish families. And that was the neighborhood I grew up in. So it was a very unusual place in that it was very integrated for that reason. So we grew up not in the stereotype of what people would expect. There were a lot of upper middle class Black families. There were, just a great mix of people, and people got along very easily. But then on the outskirts of that, 6 minutes from where I grew up, was a very impoverished neighborhood that was predominantly Black and had been pretty ravaged by the drug war and institutional racism. And then 8 minutes the other way, maybe less, is one of the most privileged white neighborhoods, and then the suburbs and the main line that was pretty famous. So it was an interesting place to grow up, seeing such disparities so close together, and then, but also seeing what it could be when those communities were combined. So it's hard to describe, but I think it was pretty unusual.
No, you did an excellent job. But what was it mean to you? How did it affect you? We've heard, I think those of us who don't know folks who are biracial really well learned a lot from our former president, Barack Obama, who also, like you, went to Harvard, like Tom Morello and Mark Whitaker, biracial Harvard grads. I've learned a lot from them. But what was it like for you in terms of your identity?
That's certainly the first time anyone's put me in President Obama in a sentence. So I appreciate the company, but it's hard to sum up. My therapist would say that it caused me for a while to both sides everything and not have an opinion for myself. I can see your point of view. I can see your point of view. But what do I want? So I worked on that for a long time. But I think that it's a best of both worlds in a lot of ways. I love Black culture, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. I was raised Jewish. I'm no longer very religious or anything, but I don't know. I think in some ways it's a passport for being part of different people's communities. But at the same time, it can sometimes feel like you're not really a part of either because you're different. But at the same time, you have a lot of privileges, so there's not much to complain about. So I would say it's that. But I think in terms of Manhunt, my mom, she is white and Jewish, and she taught in the inner city underprivileged schools for about 40 years. And one school she worked at was all Black, and then the next school she worked at was a lot of recent immigrant students. And I grew up trying to understand why certain areas in the city were so destitute and so ravaged by poverty. And the more I learned about Reconstruction and what happened post-emancipation, to me, I always saw a direct line that this was never anyone's fault or some kind of deficit in people's ethnicity or race, but that there must be some connection to the fact that we had slavery for so many years and then the disparity that we see in our country. So that was something that I was pretty aware of from a very young age and made that connection for myself, and was surprised growing up that, and even as an adult, that more adults don't see that direct connection. So I think that was part of my interest. But I didn't even realize that when I started the show. I definitely started writing the show because I was interested in the investigation of the Lincoln assassination and the fact that was a true crime story I'd never really seen or knew about, which is surprising because it's one of the most famous murders of all time.
Yeah, if you like true crime, the genre, and apparently everybody does, it's not my thing. And I didn't look at this series as true crime, but it's a great way to pitch it because it's one of the most popular genres. It's exactly that in a way. I guess you just don't think about it. But you're growing up in Philadelphia. Obviously, you're surrounded by history. And as you mentioned, your background, your ethnicity, and the community that you grew up in, it's there, it's ever present. But like most Americans, even with your background, we didn't learn that much about most of this stuff in school, certainly not post-emancipation and Reconstruction. Is that true of your childhood, your education?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think most of us are taught through the Civil War, and then most teachers skip ahead to World War I. So there's like a huge gap from the 1860s till like the 1920s.
Thank God. I feel like I don't know what year the film Glory came out, and I don't know if it holds up. I feel like some have criticized it as a kind of white savior. Matthew Broderick's role was whatever, but I look at it as an educational film because I had no idea. I didn't know that black men fought for the Union or why. Like that movie really, I think, helped educate me in ways that I wasn't. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that movie completely blew me away and definitely left a huge impression on me. And I don't completely see that one as a white savior film because the guy that Broderick plays is a little bit inept. Like he's just a little bit in over his head. And I actually think the soldiers played by Andre Braugher and Denzel Washington they come across as so impactful with their own agency. And those are two just indelible performances. Yes, that had a huge impact on me. Reading some books in school had an impact on me. And I think even when I was developing Manhunt, at some point I started bringing the Black Union soldiers into the story in episode 3, and a couple executives questioned me about whether it was realistic or not. So I looked it up and I found that there was about 180,000 African-American soldiers for the Union. And I showed them the stat and everyone was really shocked. And so I think that you're right. That's something that just isn't portrayed. Most of the movies that take place in that time period or miniseries, you mostly just see white soldiers on both sides.
If people don't watch Manhunt, I feel like they're not good people because they don't want to know. They don't want to be educated about history. And I'm just teasing listeners, but the point is I learned so much that I didn't know. It sounds like you did as well. But just one more question about you before we get to the series, which I am so obsessed with and have been doing so much research since I watched episode 1, which you of course wrote, which is why entertainment? Like, why did this, at what point did you decide to do what you're doing, go into writing? Was that your primary pursuit?
I was all over the place. I wanted to be an actor starting in high school. I went to a high school where we didn't have a lot of funding, but I had a lot of passion for performing. And Leslie Odom Jr. was in middle school at my school, and he was such a prodigy at that age. He would be in the high school plays even when he was in middle school. And so I loved performing. I pursued that in college, and then people were, hey, would you direct this? Or you want to write something? So I was like, okay, I get the hint. I'm better behind the camera. But I think acting for many years definitely influenced my writing. And I feel it does give me an edge in terms of seeing the different perspectives of the different parts and just scene work and stuff. I wanted to be a poet. I wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, like a lot of things. But my senior year of college, I came across a photograph of a woman that was very stunning who was in one of my professor's offices. And I kept walking by it and being like, who is that woman? Because she's a Black woman, but she's wearing like a very 1920s flapper kind of jewelry and like sequins and stuff. And finally, one day I just stopped by his office and I just said, do you mind telling me who that is? And so he told me, and her name was Aida Overton Walker, and she was the first Black actress on Broadway. And I became really obsessed with her story and her company and what they were allowed to do and not do on stage as Black performers in the 1910s and early turn of the century. Anyway, so I ended up for my senior thesis writing a musical, like a play about them. And I convinced my professors to do that. I could do that instead of writing a paper. I really didn't enjoy writing papers. I love research. I love going to libraries. I would find little articles that were disintegrating in my hand. I love all that. But I am not someone who is good at footnoting stuff and making an argument and all of that stuff in a sort of academic way. So I think even at that point, I was very interested in turning primary sources into drama. And so that's how I started. And then worked for Manhunt too, because I used a lot of the trial transcript. I think a lot of people don't know there was a conspirators trial for the people who worked with Booth. I had never known there was a trial, didn't know anything about it. And it was this big deal. People refer to it as the trial of the century, even of the 19th century. That document, you can find it on Library of Congress website and other places, but it's about 1,000 pages long. And I honestly think that a lot of the reason why some of the myths about the assassination have lasted so long is that who's going to read a 1,000-page document? Very few people.
What are some of the myths that you're referring to?
One that comes to mind is that Dr. Mudd was this unwitting doctor who Booth just stumbled across and who he was just helping him and doing his oath to
After John Wilkes Booth assassinates Lincoln, he takes off and he's looking for a doctor. He gets treatment at
Dr. he broke
Mudd.
his leg. Yeah. There's a debate with historians if he broke his leg jumping off the balcony after he shot Lincoln, or if when he was on the run, his horse fell asleep and fell on his leg or something. There's disagreement about that. I can see both sides. I didn't want to do the horse falling on him because it would involve a stunt that is dangerous for the actor and the horse. And there's a comedy to it. There's the sort of patheticness to Booth in that scenario. But I went with the balcony. Even though he was good at stunts, I just think with the adrenaline and everything, it just makes sense that he hurt his ankle.
The series is based on a best-selling book by James Swanson, Manhunt, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer. And yet you take all kinds of creative license and to turn it into a TV show. Talk to me a little bit about how that works and how you did it. Because you mentioned you love research. I didn't realize when I was watching it that it was based on this book. I was just like, did she just do 1 billion hours of research? But yeah, I'm sure you did anyway. In addition to the book, it doesn't adhere perfectly to that, does it? You took a lot of creative license.
No, the book is nonfiction and the show is historical fiction. And the book was very beloved and it's really useful in its research on the assassination night. So the pilot of the show, I took a lot of details from that. And then I would say it's also really drawn in terms of Booth's escape and the people he comes across and the capture at the barn with the cavalry. So those were the places in the book that I used in a pretty straightforward manner. But it's not really told with a protagonist and an antagonist. And I didn't want to center Booth as a white supremacist as the lead role and like the hero escaping or whatever, which the book is a little bit. Not that he's a hero. It's really focused on Booth's escape. I stumbled across the figure of Edwin Stanton, who was President Lincoln's Secretary of War, which is a position we don't have anymore. But essentially, it was like being in charge of the Pentagon and the FBI at the same time. So it's this giant building, huge department. And Lincoln worked there. He would go there every day and they would run behind the scenes. The Civil War, that was like behind the curtain of the Civil War, was in the War Department. He had a desk in there. He drafted the Emancipation Proclamation at his desk in there. So we might picture him being in the White House a lot, but in reality, he was spending a lot of his hours at the War Department with Stanton. And I realized that there was no real sitting president from the moment Booth shot Lincoln and he was unconscious. He never spoke again until Johnson was sworn in the next day. Stanton was our de facto president for about 12 hours. And I found that scenario fascinating. And I was like, who is this man? Why aren't we taught about him? And then the more I learned about him is really like, why don't we know who this man is? Because he was such a warrior for civil rights and he really put everything on the line. to try to keep the agenda that they had just won the mandate for in the Civil War. Personally, he tried to save it. So that was how I found my way into describing the show and selling the show, was through him. And at the core, it's about avenging your friend's death.
Yeah, that certainly plays out really well in the series. And I love that there's all these flashbacks where you see Stanton and Lincoln talking together. I think it's probably one of my favorite parts. I can't say what my favorite part is. It's one of my favorite TV shows I've ever watched in my life. I'm obsessed with the era.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you.
I love history, but the way this is written, the way it was cast, I can't say much about that. Really, that's really interesting. It's just so good. What is your role as the showrunner and executive producer in terms of how much of a vision that you have around something like the trauma, for example, like 12 Years a Slave or to Django Unchained or something? Some people might call some of that trauma porn. I've heard you talk about that phrase. We don't see that kind of trauma being put on the Black characters so overtly. Tell me why you made the choices you made for the Black characters specifically.
Yeah, I think in recent years there's been a bit of an exhaustion from the audience in terms of wanting to see a more dynamics or like a bigger cloth of roles for Black characters. And I'm not in the camp of, I don't want to see any more stories that take place during slavery. I'm not in that camp at all. But I do feel that, and I have observed even people on my crew I had makeup and hair people who have worked on a lot of those movies, and they personally would come up to me and say, thank you for doing it a little bit differently, because we respect and admire all of those other productions, and I do as well. But sometimes it can just be so painful to experience it and see it and be part of it, and you're doing something a little bit differently. So that meant a lot to me. And so what I did was I tried to take a little bit more of a Hitchcockian approach. So in episode 5, one of our favorite characters, Mary Sims, who's played by Lovie Simone, who hopefully if you're enjoying the show, you're really with her character. You're really rooting for her. She was a figure in real life who worked for Dr. Mudd as his slave. She kept house for him, is how she described herself in the trial transcript. And in the trial transcript, she refers to being beaten by Dr. Mudd. And I wanted that part of her story in the show, but she's so amazing and you're so with her. I just couldn't stand actually seeing that or making the actress go through that. So what we did was we allude to it. And then the way I wrote it was that the door closes and you just hear it. And so I'm proud of that, because people have actually even reached out to me, messaged me like, wow, that I've never seen it done that way. And
I so appreciated that. I was the last person to see 12 Years a Slave. I'm joking, but as a white man, I knew I didn't want to watch that. I don't like to see that. I watched it, but eventually, but I don't want to watch. I know they happened. I just like the way that you did it. And in case any listeners haven't seen it, it really is done differently. There's a scene after Lincoln is assassinated when I think the Black soldiers find out and others. And I thought it was just really interesting to think about. And I hadn't really thought about this, not only what it meant for everybody in the country, but what it specifically meant for Black people when they found out the President Lincoln had been assassinated. What was this going to mean? Were they going to go backwards into slavery? It was just after he surrendered. It was just after the war was over. It's bloody. Yes. So I thought that was just an important scene, and it plays out throughout the series. How much did you think about the reaction of Black Americans?
I was curious if people would watch the show differently and have different stakes in mind as they're watching it. And I'm really happy that a diverse audience has found the show and enjoyed it. That That information was another surprise for me. I did not know that Lincoln was assassinated 5 days after Lee surrendered. I had no idea the timeline was the same week. I was under the impression Lincoln's a 2-term president. He was basically there for almost 8 years. Like, I don't know why I assumed that, but I did. And that was shocking to me. And I was like, wait, how can we not interpret the assassination as a direct response to Lee surrendering and an attempt to trying to reverse the result of the war? And again, I don't know why we aren't taught it with that framework or that timeline. I wasn't. I don't know if you were, Pete, but that opened up a whole other lens or context for it. And then the other huge surprise was that there were multiple attacks the night of the assassination, that it wasn't just this lone wolf Booth shooting Lincoln in Ford's Theater, but that there was an attack on the Secretary of State,
Right.
William
I
Stewart.
had no
Did
idea.
you know that?
I stopped. I pressed pause. I'm sorry. Sorry, Monica, but I pressed pause many times. But certainly then I was like, wait, what? They went after other cabinet secretaries and people whose names I had heard of, but I never knew they were almost killed.
Yeah, it's wild. It's so strange how it's just been put in the shadows, and I don't know why it's been withheld from us.
Isn't it because of who writes history?
Possibly. I don't know, but I don't know why people would not want us to know that the government was almost toppled that night and just, It's not like it's not in the books. Like, it's in the history books. If you read something about Stewart, it's there. But in general, in our collective conscious, in our mythology, in our culture, I don't think it's a well-known part.
One of the other things, and I found this, it was in the final episode, where we learned about General Howard. I learned about General Howard for the first time, and he was a white general that founded Howard University. I feel like that I had no idea about that either. And
yeah, same. And it's hard to see in the shots, but he was also an amputee. He had no arm on one side. I can't remember if it was from the elbow down or shoulder, but he ran something called the Freeman's Bureau, which also I don't think a lot of us know about. But there was actually a department that was, I think it was part of the War Department, but basically it was a whole department to try to help freed people gain a foothold in society from having nothing to being citizens. And they would also help former slaves find family members since so many were separated. So they would have places where you could try to reunite with your brother or your son or your mother, and they would help with trying to provide food, education, and job training. So that was something that Howard ran and Stanton was a part of overseeing. They were just really ahead of their time. Stanton even, I couldn't show this as much as I wanted to, but he hired a lot of disabled veterans to work in the War Department and gave them jobs when they couldn't get jobs elsewhere. So he would find something for them to do in his department. The Freeman's Bureau run by Howard, I had no idea about that it existed. I had no idea that Elizabeth Keckley, who was a gown designer, who's African American, she was a trailblazer and she made gowns for Mary Todd Lincoln. She had her own kind of separate, what we would call now a nonprofit organization. She was a philanthropist and she had something called the Contraband Society. Contraband was a name at the time for freed people. And so she was running sort of her own Freeman's Bureau and getting donations from people to help people who were coming up to DC after slavery. It was just really beautiful to me because sometimes people can say, why don't people help themselves? And I really thought it was important to show that we have always been trying to help each other and help ourselves and try to, if someone gains a foothold, trying to put a ladder behind you to help lift other people up. And seeing how all of that institutional framework fell apart with President Johnson, I think has been very moving for the audience. And
yeah, that was the last thing I was going to ask you. And I'm sure you don't want me to minimize any of the characters, and you didn't create them, but you wrote around them and introduced them to us. But I feel like Andrew Johnson was a real piece of shit. Sorry.
Yeah, pretty much. It's hard to find something redeemable about him, except that he wasn't Confederate and he believed in preserving the Union.
I guess my last easy question, I hadn't seen you answer this. Did you get first of all, I know that you had the job responsibility of hiring a lot of people. I know you hired a lot of women and a lot of Black folks to work on the crew and so on. And I think that's obviously important. But how dare you, I don't know if you had anything to do with the hiring, hire 2 Brits to play 2 of the main American roles, both John Wilkes Booth and Secretary Stanton. Did you get any grief for that? I actually don't care about that thing at all, but did anybody were like, hey, you hired British actors?
Anthony is from Northern Ireland, so I'm not sure he would identify as British. But I know what you're saying. Yes, I did almost all the hiring. That's a big part of show running, is choosing all the department heads, from costuming to production design to casting and music. So yeah, I know people have an issue with that on different productions, but I just think of this as like a global world of artists, and people from other countries, Australia, Ireland, they're really good at accents, and they're also really convincing in period stories. A lot of them are classically trained. And I think that Anthony is one of those actors. He plays Booth, Anthony Boyle. Stereotype of actors from the UK is that they're very cerebral. And the stereotype of American actors is that they're very instinctual, like a Robert De Niro or a Raging Bull. And Anthony's one of those actors who can completely do both. He can be so physical and so passionate and emotional, but you can also I gave him Edgar Allan Poe, and he reads it beautifully. So he's incredible. And then Tobias, he has an incredible work ethic and ear. So I knew he would nail the American accent. He is before this, he's seen as so quintessentially British and even playing royalty. So I just thought it would be such an incredible challenge to see if he could convince the audience that he was completely not that. And he nailed it.
I didn't see what was the other show he's popular for, but I watched him in The Crown playing Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, and he was great. But watching him in this, it was when I was so pathetic. I was tweeting everybody, first you and then him. I was like, yeah, I like you. But he was so good. So good. I couldn't take my eyes off him. All right, last question. There's so many more.
That role was a labor of love.
What would you say, please, if you don't mind, to my daughter, Ava? She's 19 and she wants to be Monica Beletsky when she grows up.
Oh, that's very
Any
sweet.
advice for a young person entering the entertainment industry, a young woman, if you will? Mm-hmm. What did you do right or wrong or that helped?
There's so many winding things that influenced my life that made it possible for me to do it and survive it and thrive in it. It's hard to pinpoint, but even just like growing up with boys, I would say was useful. I had a brother. I grew up with a lot of boys in my neighborhood. I hung out with a lot of boys after school. It's a very male-dominated business, and it's a little less so now, and probably by the time she's a professional, it will be even less, and there will be more equity. But I've been in multiple writers' rooms where I'm the only woman and the only person of color in the room. And so I think having a good sense of humor, I think the main thing in this business is patience and endurance. I think that it's probably taken me twice as long to get a show as some of my male colleagues. And I think that it hasn't been to do with talent. I think that women are still under trusted with ambitious material. And I think that hopefully that's changing. But my advice would just be that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that you have to enjoy the process of it and the collaboration and the community, make friends who are interested in the same things as you, because they will be probably the people who are working and hiring and, want you to be on their crew if they're making a short film or any of that, as opposed to, hoping that someone's going to pick you out of the sky and see your talent. So that's what I would say. And then I would also say, try to work with the type of people that you want to be. So, if you can get a job doing research. I have someone who did research for me. I was doing various biopics that needed a lot of research. So I had someone who worked with me for 2 years, helping me with research. And we just had a rapport. I had a sense of trust. And then they were one of the people I hired to be in my room. So I would say find your community of your own age and then try to work with people. But then my last piece of advice would be to just live life, because I meet a lot of writers who have only been on a desk being an assistant to a filmmaker, and then they want to be a filmmaker and they don't necessarily have a lot of stories to tell. They don't necessarily have a lot of life experience. So like when I was coming up in writers' rooms, there's 16 characters, let's say, on Parenthood or Friday Night Lights. I probably had 15 odd jobs when I lived in New York City trying to make a living. When they were like, we need an odd job for the daughter, I was like, how about this? How about that? I do think that living life is important for writers.
For any creative person, as a stand-up comedian coming up, I didn't have much of a life. I had such an easy, privileged life growing up. Material, and I was an autobiographical comedian, didn't come easy for me. And I decided I needed to do weird, different things to be able to write about. And I remember it was before the internet, I went on a blind date because I'd never been on that. And I was like, that could be material. And then I actually started going to see a therapist, not because I had problems. I just thought maybe this will help. I heard of comedians going to therapists. And
did this date and this therapist know that you were just material, that they were material for you?
I didn't want to tell you this, but I started dating the therapist.
That's material.
Great guy. Neither of us had ever been with a man. No, nothing. She was a woman, actually. No, yes, I think they did know. Maybe the blind date didn't, but
I'm going to think twice before I start dating a stand-up comedian now that I know it's fodder for material.
Oh, no, you're never going to date a stand-up comedian. I care too much about you hardly even knowing you to tell you that. I will let you go. I'm so grateful that you joined me, but I'm much more grateful that you put this out into the world for all of us. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to see whatever you do next. I hope I'll get to talk to you about it, but I'm a monster fan of your work now, and I'm really grateful to you for joining me.
That's very nice. Thank you, Pete. It was great.
Yeah! Wasn't that awesome? How big of a deal is she? How big of a deal are we that we get to talk to Monica Beletsky? So cool. I really love that, and obviously love the show. Go watch it. Go support her. Go tweet or Instagram. Go contact her. I wasn't going to ask for her email for you to contact her because she's in the entertainment world, and you can get inundated with all kinds of people asking all kinds of questions, and it can just be too much, and didn't want to do that. But absolutely tweet her. And I'm sure she'll see that and she'll appreciate it, as so many of you did this week with my guest, Austin Frerick, who reached out to me privately and said that my audience, and he's done like 20 shows, is the most engaged audience of any show he has done. And I was super proud of us for that. So please keep it going. It matters when you reach out to the guests and tell them that you heard them here on Stand Up. They're more likely to come back. They're more likely to tell their friends to join me. There's a billion podcasts out there. Everybody and your mother, literally your mother, has one. Even if she's no longer with us, she's got a podcast up in heaven. Sorry, that got depressing if you miss Mom. All right, really fucking digging myself a hole here at the end. I love you, bumblebees. I hope you're laughing. I hope you're loving. I hope you're feeling good. I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout. And that's it. That's all I've got for you. John Carroll taking us out as he does every day. JohnCarroll.org. Go support him right now.
Stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt. Down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on. Stand